Welcome, dear viewer. This is Derpy. So, with the release of Dark Souls Remastered coming soon, at least from the time of this video, I wanted to showcase the PvP aspect of this game. And this is going to be mainly geared more towards the Dark Souls 3 PvP players trying to get into Dark Souls 1 PvP. And I wanted to make it because I know that a lot of people throw a lot of shade towards the PvP, mainly just because of the mechanics like poise and like the builds that you can create that are like really cheesy and stun locks, BS chaining, and all this other stuff. And yes, while that can be annoying and it can be very frustrating, that isn't all that the PvP has to offer. You're not going to be running into like a hot shot every single invasion. And I am going to be talking about invasions, not duels themselves, because I never really dueled in this game too much. More so I did invasions. And I know there's already like invasion videos out there back in the day of more prominent YouTubers, and you could go ahead and watch them. They still have some like very sound advice, and you could probably learn from them, because a lot of the stuff that they talked about still applies even in Dark Souls 3, and it can definitely help you going into Dark Souls 1 PvP. But at least I wanted to showcase this from the perspective of a DS3 player like me. So to begin talking about Dark Souls 1 PvP, at least when you're transitioning from Dark Souls 3 to 1, the main thing you're probably going to notice right away is going to be the movement. Movement in Dark Souls 1 is not the same as it is in Dark Souls 3. And it's to be expected because this game came out way before Dark Souls 3 even came out. So everything is a little more robust in some aspects, like the exclusion of omnidirectional rolling. And I know a lot of people are wanting to have omnidirectional rolling in Dark Souls 1, but honestly, everything is so fine-tuned to complement each other with like enemies, because you also have to account for PvE, not just PvP. If you include omnidirectional rolling in the remake, that's going to change PvE by a lot. And it's going to make a lot of bosses and enemies easier, because enemy AI in this game is not as, well, fine-tuned as it is in later installments. So omnidirectional rolling is not going to be in this game. Instead, you're going to have directional rolling, which is a lot more restrictive in the directions you can go. Now, coming from Dark Souls 3, a remedy to this is going to be going unlocked. In a couple of instances, you'll see me going unlocked because I'm not used to directional rolling in this game too much. I used to be back in the day whenever I used to PvP a lot, but coming from Dark Souls 3, like, it is a huge change. In some instances, probably not shown in these clips, but the main downside to unlocking and rolling is that I leave the back towards my opponent, and that can be really troublesome if they're a BS fisher. And there's a lot of these type of players in this game because it's really rewarding, and it's a lot more easier to pull off than it is in the later installments. So that's mainly going to be a very big change you're going to notice. And also in Dark Souls 3, your medium roll was a pretty good roll. You could pretty much just get by at like 69.9% equip load, but that's not the case in this game. Instead, the medium roll it's not bad, but it's not as good as it is in Dark Souls 3. Your fast roll from Dark Souls 1 is pretty much your medium roll from Dark Souls 3. And that's going to be kind of difficult for some builds, especially at lower levels, unless you want like a trade-off. Because the thing is that in order to get that light roll, you're pretty much just going to have to like get really light armor and like weapons to like enable you to do that fast roll. And honestly, the fast roll for me is like essential. Like, you can do a medium roll type of build and play style, but for me, fast roll is going to be the way to go, especially in invasions where you're going to be encountering a lot of players, and even more so probably in the remaster because you're going to have to deal with four-man ganks instead of just 3. So that's going to be a huge change. Now, are ganks really tough in this game compared to the other ones? Well, I think that kind of depends on how you view it, honestly. In Dark Souls 3, you can pretty much take on a gank, at least in my experience. You can take on a relatively experienced gank, as long as you knew what you were doing, and like you did all the right plays, and like you knew how like their mannerisms were, how you could act in response to all this damage coming towards you. In Dark Souls 1, it's a little more slower, and honestly, how I used to deal with ganks back in the day is that I would pretty much just pull off a Martyr's Brigade tactic and just, you know, go ham, I guess, and just pretty much just throw off any morals I had, any like set limits I put on myself in terms of being a quote unquote invader, and I would just backstab. Honestly, that's what I would do, and I think that's a lot of I think that can be said for a lot of other DS1 players as well, is that they would use to take care of the gank by backstabbing them, and I think that's a very effective tactic. So in terms of ganking in Dark Souls 1, I'm eager to see what they'll do. I want to see how they react to 2 invaders in Dark Souls 1. So that's going to be interesting, and really we have to wait and see how ganks are going to be in Dark Souls 1 Remastered. And that's another thing, is that like I want to see what other people can bring to the table that maybe like people back in the day didn't discover, like maybe new builds and new tactics and strategies and all this. So I'm very, very excited to see the Dark Souls 3 community, or any community honestly, come to Dark Souls Remastered, and especially because back in the day I came in at what, like 2000 and like I don't even know, 2014 or something. I got the game when it was free on gold, so yeah, that's also probably the reason why I have a very mixed bias on terms of the Dark Souls Remastered. But I got it for free. I got Dark Souls 1 for free because I had it on gold on Xbox. So at the time when I was playing, it was pretty much empty besides the forest, and that's also going to be a very interesting sight to see. But honestly, I've had a lot of fun back in the day, and I didn't have like as much experience in Dark Souls 1 as I do in Dark Souls 3. So I want to bring some experience that I have in Dark Souls 3 to Dark Souls 1, see what I can do, and like any tactics that I learned in Dark Souls 3, I want to see if I can pull off in Dark Souls 1. So what's some tips and tricks that I can give to Dark Souls 3 players coming to Dark Souls 1 PvP? Well, there is a couple of things I wanted to share, at least that come to mind at this very moment, is that backstabs are going to be a part of the PvP. And I don't think they're going to change it at all in the remaster. I think they're going to stay the exact same, which is a one-hit confirm, no longer a two-hit confirm like Dark Souls 2 and 3. So it's going to be pretty much instant, and I don't know how lag or latency is going to affect it, so we're going to have to deal with it for the time being, and we're going to have to adapt. So one of the most useful things that I think I can give to you as an invader, or just a PvP player in general, if you're going to be fighting someone, the easiest technique that I learned while invading is going to be counter strafing someone for a backstab. And you can watch a lot of other DS1 players do this. In Martyr's Brigade, I just looked at this. I don't think he ever directly mentioned it. In fact, actually, I think he did in a couple of his videos. And I would just watch how he played back in the day, and I would incorporate it into my own. Now, my skills in these clips are not reminiscent of how I used to be. I used to be a little more aggressive than I was in these clips, but anyway, the easiest thing that you can learn to help you out a lot, especially against noob hosts and players, because they're going to be going for that back. I can already see it with their Drake swords and their Nameless Knight armor and their shield. They're going to be trying to strafe you to get that backstab. Now, to counter this, all you have to do is just move your stick to the left or to the right, wherever direction they're going. Go into that direction and just press R1 as soon as they show their back. It's like the easiest thing. If you have a brain and like you just know how to use a controller, you can easily do this technique. It is not hard to do. The problem arises whenever it's a experienced player and they can pretty much just get like a roll backstab on you, and those type of players, they're gonna be pretty tough. Like even like back in the day, I still don't know how to deal with them. But back then, I didn't even really take the PvP too seriously, and that's the major thing that I think you should consider about this game, is that there's a lot of wonky, goofy stuff in this game that I think that the like tryhards and all these other dudes. Like, don't listen to that. Just play it for fun. Like, if you want to improve, I understand. Like, look at all the tips and tricks you want. But I think if you really want to get the maximum enjoyment out of this game, it's just experiment and just play how you want to play. If you really get an adrenaline rush by backstabbing people and just BS chaining people and like pointing down and all that, then all the more power to you. But I really think that if you're going to be playing this game for just like, if you all you want to do is win, 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 and you can't accept a loss, I really think you won't enjoy this game. At least the PvP, I mean, not the PvE. But the PvP, I think, should be viewed from a standpoint that it is just for fun. It is an extra mechanic that I am glad and thankful that we have in a video game, because there's no other game that has it, and it is very enjoyable. And, you know, you don't have to have, like, the most optimized build, or even a, like, optimized build in general. You can go in here with some wonky stuff, and, like, you could still do well. And I think, I don't know, because in this game, I could run, like, a wonky build, and I think backstabs in general just really helped, like, lift the weight for, like, how troublesome it was to actually win. And I don't know if it really makes builds all viable through backstabs or whatever, or the tech, but I really find myself using a lot more weapons in this game, and I just can win a lot more easier than I can do in Dark Souls 3 at least. But builds in Dark Souls 1 are going to have to be very specific, because in Dark Souls 2 and 3, at least in those, you had a respec option. In this, you don't have a respec option. So you're going to have to make a one character in one build. You won't be able to alter your stats later on. You're going to have to make a character in specific. I would recommend using Mugen Monkey or Souls Planner. If they have one for Dark Souls 1, I'm not sure. But just try out different weapons and builds and tactics while you're invading, or just even dueling, I'm sure, and just PvPing in Dark Souls 1. Just try out different things. Experiment. Use different weapons, see what's good about it, its pros and cons, and what counters it, and what's it strong against. Because, you know, a lot of the weapons have different quirks this time around, because some weapons have a huge whiff punish. Like halberds, maces, axes. Those are the weapons that come to mind. They have this huge, like, punish window that if you miss an attack, you whiff really, really hard. And, like, your opponent can punish you so easily if you miss, so you really have to time your attacks. But if you land a hit, then sometimes some weapons, you can stun lock them and get a lot of damage off. But if you miss, you know, that's kind of the trade-off for it. But you do a lot of damage with axes and maces and halberds in this game. And they can be really fast if you land the hits, so that's what really enables you to get these stun locks. But let me briefly talk about this clip. So this invasion is what I really hope that the Dark Souls 1 Remaster PvP is going to be like. So yes, there is latency in this fight, and I'm interested to see how PvP will be. Well, that's assuming that the latency and all that will be at least a little ironed out than it was back in the day. If it just stays the exact same in terms of, like, connection, I'm gonna be very, very appalled. But hopefully it will be a little more smoother, a little more like Dark Souls 3, but, you know, even then it still has some issues. But this fight is what I hope Dark Souls Remastered PvP will be like. Not going for backstabs, doing spacing, you know, kind of like Dark Souls 3. I kind of want it to be like Dark Souls 3 PvP, carrying over to Dark Souls 1, where we're just trying to space each other out, try and trick each other into whiffings an attack, and then, you know, punishing them, but not playing super passive, but just, you know, going at it, doing different attacks, doing different things and stuff like that. I had a very good time with that guy, and I had some other good fights with other people too. But I really, really hope that the passive meta that was in Dark Souls 3 kind of goes away in this game, but it's pretty strong in this game. Because another tip, I guess, just a heads up for Dark Souls 3 players, is that if you get a guard break in this game, you don't get a riposte. So shields are very effective in this game. They pair that up with the rapier, and, like, if you get guard broken, it doesn't matter because you can't really punish them. You know, I don't think instability frames were in Dark Souls 1, so It's pretty much just like a brief window to get an R1 off, and then that's it. So there's no riposte after guard breaks. There's instant backstabs. So, you know, you have to take this in consideration whenever you're PvPing against somebody. And this is another example of a Havel monster that you're going to be encountering a lot throughout the game. Now, defense in Dark Souls 1, let me just briefly mention this, is that defense in Dark Souls 1 is really, well, armor in general. Armor in general is going to play a huge role in PvP. In PvP, armor really makes a build. The reason why I say that is because defense really plays more of a role in Dark Souls 1 than in 3. Because in 3, you could just put on like 4 equipment and then you have absorption or whatever, and that kind of mitigates some damage. But you won't get a huge margin on that. In Dark Souls 1, defense really does matter. So you have defense and poise tied to armor. You know, those are two very important factors to consider whenever you're going to make a build and what armor you're going to be wearing. You also have to account for weight and stuff like that. So just keep that in mind whenever you make a build and see if you decide to, you know, you have to get that balance between a roll that you want. You got to get some acceptable poise, or you could get the wolf ring, or you could do something else like wearing some decent armor, but you're going to be mid-rolling or something. You know, you're going to have to find a good balance between defense, weight, and poise, and all that other stuff, and fashion too, if you're a big guru about that. So that's going to be another issue that's going to present itself to a lot of Dark Souls 3 players. Pair that up with humanity too, and you got that's what really made Twinks so powerful, is that they could wear this armor, you know. They could get like min-maxed armor or whatever, go into lower levels, get like 99 humanity, which gives them so much defense, then pair that up with like max upgraded armor, and you got a recipe for a disaster. It's a horror show. That's a lot of damage on the Havel monster that I had to do. And yes, I had to point down. I'm sorry, but even then, it carries over. Yes, I had to get the, well, what is it? I was salty. I'm sorry. But anyway, I should have mentioned it whenever I was fighting that Havel monster, and I'll bring it up right now, but you probably have already seen me doing it in the past couple of clips, and probably going to see in a couple of other clips coming forward, is that poison and toxic and bleed status effects are really easy to proc in this game. 2 poison knives and 2 dung pie pretty much procs on someone, anyone, and you know, that's how I counter Havel monsters. That's another tip I guess I can give, is that in Havel monster situations, it is super easy to proc them with poison or toxic. Just like even one dung pie can toxic them or poison them if you use a throwing knife, a poison throwing knife. That's how I usually counter them, just to get some passive damage while they're mid-rolling or fat-rolling around. So that's another tip I can give. Just tips and tricks, guys. But anyway, that's one thing that's going to be interesting to see is, you know, status builds, you know, because they are very effective in this game. So even though poison only does 3 damage per second instead of 7 like it is in 3, it is still very effective because of how slower the game is, and that really racks up. And not to mention toxic. Now toxic is a little more finicky because depending on how they get toxic, like the toxic hollow blow dart dudes in Blighttown, they do like, I don't even know, they do like 20 something 30 something damage per second. And the great thing about toxic is that it lasts for 10 minutes. 10 minutes, that is a very long time. So they don't got that moss, you know, that's some good, that's another source of damage that, you know, that's accumulating over time, you know. So it is very, very effective. So stock up on that dung pie and those throwing knives, guys. It is very, very effective. I didn't use them back in the day, but like coming back, I just realized how effective they are, so I've just started using them. But like I said, the damage that Toxin does depends on the source. So if you're using the, well, I'm not going to name the weapon, but if you're using the curved greatsword that deals toxic, it's going to do 5 damage versus the dung pie, which does 7. So, you know, it really depends on like what source of like toxin you're going to use. So if you want to get a lot of damage off, I would recommend just using Dung Pie, because instead of 3 where it kind of just throws it like barely like 5 feet in front of you, like this thing goes as straight as like a fire bomb for the most part. Like you got that throwing arm in 1. Like in Dark Souls 3 you got that wimpy noodle arm. In Dark Souls 1, shoo, you can toss that like a baseball. It's insane. So, you know, that's why I use Dung Pie. It's relatively fast. It has a small little AoE that you can free aim and catch people even if they roll. But anyway, that's all that I really wanted to talk about in this video. And I'm going to leave some clips here at the end just to, you know, end it off and showcase some things. But if you made it this far, thank you, because it did kind of run for a little longer than I expected, but what can you do? And I hope that you got something out of this, whether you kind of consider some different things or you have a new outlook on it hearing from a Dark Souls 3 player. But I hope you enjoy it when it ever releases, and I hope I do too. But in conclusion, Dark Souls 1 PvP is fun. You just gotta learn how it is going to be played. But we'll see. We'll see how it is together. But I hope you have a great day. This has been Derpy. I'll see you guys later.